Venice, California, palm trees, skateboards, and beachside sunsets. But beneath the beauty lies a neighborhood with a dark past. For over 50 years, these streets have been soaked in blood. A war between Venice 13, Culver City 13, and the Shoreline Crips. This is American gang war. And today, we're diving deep into one of Los Angeles' most violent and longest-running gang rivalries. The war that turned paradise into a battlefield. To understand this war, we gotta take it back, way back, to the 1950s. Venice wasn't the tourist hotspot it is today. Back then, Oakwood, also known as Ghost Town, was one of the few areas in Los Angeles where Black and Mexican-American families could afford to live. The city called it a blighted district. Locals called it home. Venice 13, or V13, began here. Not as a drug crew or a criminal empire, but as a neighborhood car club, a group of Chicano teenagers defending their block from outsiders and police harassment. But like many LA neighborhoods during that era, poverty and racism ran deep. The Venice 13 name became more than just a hangout. It became a code of loyalty. By the late 1960s, the social tension in Los Angeles was rising. Civil rights marches, riots, police crackdowns. Gangs became both a refuge and a rebellion. What started as a few kids repping V13 on the wall turned into a full-blown street organization. And across the freeway, another name began to rise: Culver City 13. Culver City 13, or CCB 13, came out of the Mar Vista Gardens housing projects in the 1960s. They were Latino too, but from a different side of town. Venice and Culver City sat only a few miles apart. But in gang terms, that might as well have been another planet. Mar Vista Gardens was rough. Poverty, drugs, and police raids were everyday life. Young men there needed a name, a flag, and an identity. That identity became Culver City Tres. For a while, the two gangs coexisted, both proud of their roots, both claiming West LA. But as Venice expanded their tag-ups toward Washington Boulevard, Culver City members saw it as disrespect. The territorial line had been crossed. By the early 1970s, the words Venice and Culver City no longer just represented neighborhoods. They represented enemies. At first, the violence was small. Fistfights, bottles, knives. But it didn't take long for guns to enter the picture. One of the earliest and most infamous internal incidents would shake Venice 13 to its core. His name was Paco. Paco was a respected Venice 13 member. Old school, loyal. But he had one problem. His cousin was from Culver City 13. His homeboys warned him, "Stop hanging with that fool or you'll get got." But Paco didn't listen. One evening, 1976, Venice Pier. Paco was out fishing with his cousin. Out of nowhere, a group of Venice 13 homies pulled up. Bats, tire irons, chains. They beat Paco nearly to death. His skull cracked, ribs shattered. The message was clear. Loyalty to the neighborhood comes before blood. He spent over a month in intensive care. When he got out, they firebombed his car. Even within Venice 13, disloyalty meant death. By the late 1970s, Venice 13 had grown. The small Oakwood neighborhood was now surrounded by rivals. Culver City 13 on one side, Santa Monica 13 on the other, and soon, a new kind of enemy, the Crips. But before the Crips came into play, another Latino gang would cross paths with Venice, Lennox 13. May 1977. Venice 13 members attended a party in the Lennox area, a night that would change everything. When a few Venice girls left to grab drinks at a corner store, Lennox members started harassing them. Word got back quick. Venice 13 homies loaded into their rides and stormed into Lenox turf. They fired into a crowd sitting in a parked car. Miraculously, no one was hit. But Lenox 13 wasn't going to let that slide. Later that same night, a drive-by thundered through the Oakwood streets, bullets piercing a Venice 13 member's house. Nobody died, but the neighborhood got the message. Venice was at war on all sides. Summer of 1978. A film called Walk Proud was being shot in Los Angeles, a movie about Chicano gang life. The producers hired real gang members as extras, from Venice 13 and Culver City 13. What was supposed to be a Hollywood opportunity turned into a street feud revival. Rumor has it, after filming one night, a group of Venice 13 members rented a limo and cruised through Culver City. The stunt didn't sit well. Days later, Culver City boys rolled through Venice, letting off 6 rounds on 2nd Avenue. 2 men, John Gonzalez and Danny Romero, were hit while taking out trash after a house party. Both barely survived. As they sped off, one of the shooters yelled out the window, "Keep out of Culver City." Police suspected it was retaliation over the limo incident, but detectives from LAPD's crash unit thought otherwise. To them, this wasn't about a movie. It was about territory, plain and simple. Around this same time, a new power was rising in Oakwood, the Venice Shoreline Crips, young black men in the same neighborhood, tired of being pushed around by both police and Latino sets. At first, Venice 13 and the Shoreline Crips shared the block. But once crack cocaine hit the west side, money changed everything. Drug corners became battle lines. Race became ammunition. In just 1 year, 4 black men were shot and killed by Venice 13 members. The media called it racial violence. Locals called it survival. California Avenue and Palms Boulevard became a war zone. Crips on one side, V13 on the other. Venice wasn't just fighting Culver City anymore. They were fighting on 2 fronts. December 1979, Venice 13 lost one of its soldiers. His name was Joel Rubio, better known on the streets as Japo. A week before his 18th birthday, he told his homies something strange. "I want a big party this year, 'cause it's gonna be my last." Japo was gunned down by Culver City 13 near Washington Boulevard. He'd recently taken part in a shooting against them. The retaliation came quick. His prophecy came true. He didn't live to see 1980. From then on, the war between Venice 13 and Culver City boys turned blood for blood. The Crips were closing in from one side, the cops from another, and every funeral added new soldiers to the streets. And as the 1980s began, Venice wasn't just fighting for pride anymore. They were fighting for survival. By the early 1980s, Los Angeles was changing, and not for the better. Crack cocaine hit the city like wildfire. Venice, Culver City, Inglewood, Watts. No neighborhood was safe. For gangs, this wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about power. Venice 13 quickly capitalized. They already had the streets, the soldiers, and the connections. But now they had the product. Dealers were making more in a week than most men made in a year. But that money brought envy, betrayal, and death. Crack brought more users and more enemies. The Venice Shoreline Crips began expanding their trade on the black side of Oakwood. Venice 13 wanted full control. What followed was one of the bloodiest turf wars in West Los Angeles history. By 1984, LAPD counted over 20 shootings between Venice 13 and Shoreline Crips, most within a 5-block radius. Kids couldn't walk to school without crossing colors. Blue versus brown. and everyone knew what that meant. Oakwood was no longer just home to Venice 13. It was a front line. The Crips moved on 6th Avenue, turning it into a drug hotspot. Venice 13 held 7th and 9th. Every night, gunfire echoed through the alleys. Police tried curfews. They raided apartments. They set up checkpoints. But it didn't stop the killing. In 1985, a young Crip named Baby Locke was found shot behind a liquor store on Broadway. The walls read, V13 Killas. Days later, a Venice 13 member, Speedy, was ambushed outside his girlfriend's house. 5 bullets to the back. It was war, and it was personal. For the first time, Venice 13 wasn't just fighting one enemy. They were caught in the middle. On the east side, Culver City 13 was still looking for revenge for Japo's death. On the west, Shoreline Crips were moving in on drug corners. Venice 13 was surrounded. By 1986, LAPD's Operation Hammer was in full swing, a citywide gang crackdown led by Chief Daryl Gates. Venice 13 was hit hard. SWAT raids at dawn, helicopters over rooftops, police dogs tearing through backyards. More than 50 Venice 13 members were arrested within months. Weapons, drugs, cash, gone. But it didn't stop the streets. In fact, it only made things worse. New, younger members filled the gap. Reckless, unpredictable, and angrier than ever. One ex-member recalled, "When the homies went to jail, the little homies took over. They didn't talk. They shot first." While Venice battled the Crips on one side, Culver City 13 was waiting for the right time to strike back, and that time came in 1987. Late August, 2 Venice 13 members were cruising down Washington Boulevard in a stolen Impala. They pulled up at a red light near Sepulveda. A blue Chevy Monte Carlo rolled up beside them, tinted windows down, muzzles out. Both Venice members were hit. One died instantly. The tag on the sidewalk read, "CCB kills Venice." In less than 24 hours, the Venice homies struck back. A drive-by at Mar Vista Gardens. 2 Culver City boys shot, 1 paralyzed. From that night forward, it was war in daylight. Police say the latest shooting between rival Latino gangs, Venice 13 and Culver City 13, marks the 12th incident this month. Bodies were dropping every week, and every shooting brought retaliation. By the late 1980s, a new power began to pull the strings from behind bars. La M, the Mexican Mafia. Venice 13, Culver City 13, Santa Monica 13, all Sureño sets. And when you're a Sureño, you answer to the Mafia. Inside the prisons, Venice and Culver City were told, no more killing each other behind the walls. But on the streets, that rule didn't always apply. Older members respected La M. The younger ones didn't care. They weren't thinking about prison politics. They were thinking about payback. Inmates from both sides tried to mediate. But once the gates opened and the homies hit the streets again, it was right back to bullets. Venice Beach, the iconic tourist paradise, became a war zone. Tourists roller skating past bloodstains. Gang tags sprayed on lifeguard towers. In 1989, a Shoreline Crip named Lil Smoke was gunned down near the basketball courts. Witnesses say the shooters wore blue and gray, Venice 13 colors. Hours later, a Venice member, Puppet, was shot outside a liquor store on Lincoln Boulevard. His body lay covered by a towel, just blocks from the ocean. The war had officially spilled onto the boardwalk. LAPD flooded the area, but the violence didn't stop. The 1990s brought a new generation of soldiers, and they grew up knowing nothing but war. Venice 13's older members were either locked up, deported, or dead. The new generation, kids born into the chaos, were colder, harder, and more ruthless. Drive-bys were daily. Gunshots at schoolyards, parties, even funerals. In 1992, during the Los Angeles riots, Venice 13 members took advantage of the chaos, looting stores, stealing guns, and claiming new blocks. But that same year, the Crips doubled down. 2 Shoreline Crips were executed near Oakwood Park. Locals found a message on the wall. V13 still here. Retaliation came that weekend. A Venice member shot dead at a taco stand. Police counted over 30 gang-related shootings between April and August. One of the killings that defined the decade was the death of Chuco, a respected Venice 13 OG. Chuco was known for trying to keep the peace, but the streets had their own code. In 1995, Chuco was shot execution-style outside a pool hall on Rose Avenue. Witnesses said it was a Shoreline Crip hit. Others claimed it was internal. The truth was never proven, but his death sent shockwaves through Venice. Old heads blamed the new generation. Young ones said it was revenge. Either way, the peace died with him. In 1998, more than 20 Venice 13 members were arrested in Operation Westside Storm. They seized kilos of cocaine, multiple AK-47s, and over $200,000 in cash. But the streets didn't go quiet. Every arrest created a new vacancy, and someone younger, hungrier, always stepped up. By the end of the century, Venice 13 and Culver City 13 had spilled enough blood to fill the ocean they both claimed. But hatred doesn't disappear. It mutates. In 1999, both gangs tried to negotiate peace under Law M supervision, a brief truce, but a single shooting ended it. A Venice 13 member named Spider was killed outside a bar near Sepulveda. Culver City was blamed, even though nobody could prove it. Within days, Venice 13 retaliated. 2 Culver City members shot in Mar Vista. The century ended exactly as it began, in blood. And as the millennium dawned, Venice 13 stood at a crossroads. Their enemies were still standing. Their allies were behind bars, and the once beautiful city by the sea had become a war memorial. But this war wasn't over. The new millennium would bring more surveillance, more arrests, and the rise of a new kind of enemy, the gang injunctions. By the early 2000s, Venice had changed. Tourists filled the boardwalk, tech startups crept into Oakwood, and million-dollar condos rose where old homies once stood guard. But behind the palm trees, the war was still alive. Venice 13 wasn't gone. They were adapting. January 2000, LAPD and federal agents launched Operation Coastal Tide. Their target, Venice 13's surviving leadership. In a coordinated dawn raid, over 30 homes across Oakwood were hit simultaneously. Dozens were arrested on charges ranging from narcotics trafficking to attempted murder. Among them was Ruben Lil Man Torres, one of Venice 13's top shot callers, accused of ordering hits from prison. Prosecutors claimed Lil Man was funneling orders from inside county jail through coded letters, what they called kite messages. Each letter detailed who should be taxed, who should pay tribute, and who should be erased. Subject directed V13 to collect $200 weekly from independent dealers operating west of Lincoln Boulevard. Non-payment results in death. For authorities, it was evidence of a structured organization, not just a neighborhood gang. For the homies, it was just another day in the struggle. In 2002, the city of Los Angeles declared war on Venice 13 through paperwork, the infamous Venice 13 gang injunction. It banned suspected members from gathering in groups of 3 or more, from wearing blue or gray, even from being outside after dark in certain zones. Police called it community protection. Residents called it racial profiling. And for Venice 13, it was a death sentence in slow motion. Members couldn't stand on corners, couldn't meet with their own family members without being arrested for association. But just like every war before, the streets found a way to adapt. Instead of tagging walls, they used burner phones. Instead of house meetings, they met at the beach. The code of silence remained unbroken. In 2004, a shocking betrayal hit Venice 13. One of their own, a longtime member known as Pelon, turned informant. He gave us names, safe houses, even the stash locations. He was tired of running. Pelon had been facing 20 years for drug charges. In exchange for leniency, he cooperated, leading to several high-profile arrests, including Dreamer and Boxer, two Venice soldiers accused in a double homicide. For the first time, the gang began to fracture from within. Old school members called it the snitch era. Loyalty was fading. The code was breaking. In a taped statement, Pelon told investigators, "It used to be about the neighborhood. Now it's about who can make the most money, who can post with the most guns. These kids don't even know who we lost for this block." To many, that was the beginning of the end for Venice 13's unity. By 2006, social media was changing everything, and the streets weren't immune. Venice 13 members began posting photos on MySpace and later Facebook. Guns, money, gang signs, not realizing the police were watching. Detectives from the LAPD Pacific Division created fake profiles to infiltrate gang networks. They tracked who commented, who liked, who bragged about shootings. Every post became evidence. They weren't afraid anymore. They put their crimes online before we could even write a warrant. In 2008, LAPD used those online clues to bust a Venice 13 member who'd filmed himself flashing a pistol hours after a drive-by near Lincoln and Palms. That footage became the key to his 25-year sentence. Even as the police tightened their grip, the racial lines between Venice 13 and the Shoreline Crips never fully healed. Between 2008 and 2011, a string of racially motivated shootings reignited the old feud. A Shoreline member was gunned down near Penmar Park. A Venice 13 soldier was killed outside a laundromat in retaliation. LAPD called it a cycle of vengeance, one older than most of the shooters themselves. One veteran officer said it best: "They're fighting ghosts. The war started before they were born, and no one remembers why." To outsiders, it looked senseless. But to the ones who grew up in Oakwood, it was identity. It was history. By the 2010s, Venice was no longer the same neighborhood. Tech companies like Google and Snapchat moved in. Luxury condos replaced rundown apartments. Locals called it the Silicon Beach takeover. Longtime residents were forced out. Rising rent, evictions, city rezoning. The same blocks where gang soldiers once stood were now lined with yoga studios and vegan cafes. For Venice 13, it was more than gentrification. It was erasure. Younger members began tagging walls again, not out of rebellion, but out of remembrance. V13 still here. A reminder that despite the new faces, the streets still had memory. In 2013, tragedy struck when Big Listo, one of the last respected OGs of Venice 13, was shot and killed in front of his mother's house. The suspect, a young Venice 13 member, reportedly acted over a personal dispute. For many in the community, it symbolized the ultimate collapse, the old generation dying at the hands of the new. His funeral brought out hundreds. Venice, Culver City, Santa Monica. Even Shoreline Crips came to pay respect. For one brief moment, the war paused. But like every pause before, it didn't last. In 2016, federal agencies returned, this time with technology on their side. The DEA, ATF, and LAPD's Gang and Narcotics Division launched Operation Pacific Sunset, a major takedown aimed at dismantling Venice 13's remnants. Wiretaps, drone surveillance, GPS trackers. The new battlefield wasn't the street, it was the digital world. Dozens were indicted on RICO charges: racketeering, gun trafficking, conspiracy to murder. Court documents revealed that Venice 13 had become intertwined with Mexican cartels, using Venice Beach as a micro-hub for meth and fentanyl distribution. Authorities say this marks one of the largest gang-related federal indictments in West Los Angeles history. For the first time in decades, Venice went quiet. Today, Venice Beach looks peaceful. The palm trees sway, the murals shine, tourists smile. But look close, and the ghosts are still there. On the corner of 7th and Brooks, a faded tag still reads, V13 for life. Older homies sit on porches, watching kids skateboard where they once ducked bullets. Some made it out. Some never left. And some, they're buried in the sand they grew up on. Venice 13 still exists. Smaller, quieter, smarter. The new generation uses coded slang online, low-profile operations, and tighter structure. They no longer rule by terror. They survive by blending in. But even as time moves forward, the question remains, was the war ever really worth it? From the 1950s car clubs to 2020's indictments, Venice 13's story is more than just violence. It's a story of poverty, loyalty, betrayal, and survival. Generations of young men grew up under the same banner, fighting for a block, a street, a name that was slowly taken from them. And as the sun sets over Venice Beach, one truth remains. The war never truly ends. It just changes shape. This has been American Gang War. The story of Venice 13 versus Culver City 13 and Crips. The deadly LA Gang War. By the early 2000s, Venice wasn't the paradise the postcards promised. The boardwalk was booming for tourists, but just a few blocks inland, Oakwood and Mar Vista were simmering with old grudges and young soldiers ready to prove something. The old Venice 13 OGs were either dead, in prison, or trying to disappear. But the new generation, they wanted to bring back that reputation, by any means. It started with a name that echoed through Culver City, John Lil Creeper Lovejoy, a known member of Culver City 13. He was gunned down near Slauson Avenue after leaving a small kickback. Witnesses said a blacked-out SUV pulled up, a window rolled down, and a single voice called out, "Where you from, fool?" Then, pop, pop, pop. Lovejoy dropped instantly. The shooters were believed to be from Venice 13. It wasn't confirmed, but it didn't matter. The retaliation came fast. Within days, Culver City 13 hit back. They rolled through Venice turf late at night, spraying bullets at any car that looked suspicious. An innocent teen named Daniel L. caught one of those bullets, paralyzed for life. The streets fell silent for a week. Then, Venice answered back. Carlos Lil Ghost Gonzalez was Venice 13, 21 years old, known on the block for his low-rider Impala and that signature blue bandana folded tight in his back pocket. He was sitting in his car outside a liquor store near Washington Boulevard when a silver Honda Civic drove by. The passenger, later identified as Sophan Pack, a Culver City 13 shooter. leaned out the window with a .40 caliber handgun. 10 shots rang out. Carlos was hit 5 times, chest, arm, neck. He died on the scene. Police got lucky. A surveillance camera caught the license plate. A few days later, LAPD's Gang and Narcotics Division raided a small apartment in Mar Vista Gardens. They found Sofon Pak hiding in a back room, the murder weapon still wrapped in a bandana. The courtroom was packed during his trial. Family members from both sides sat just feet apart. The prosecutor played the security footage, every gunshot echoing through the silent courtroom. When the verdict came, the judge's voice cut through like a blade. Sofon Pak, for the murder of Carlos Gonzalez. The court sentences you to 62 years to life. Another young life gone. Another generation feeding the cycle. By 2004, the war had evolved. Now it wasn't just V13 versus Culver City. It was also Shoreline Crips and Santa Monica 13 in the mix. Drive-bys weren't random anymore. They were calculated missions. On April 19, 2004, a red Mercedes-Benz pulled up outside an apartment complex on Lincoln Boulevard. Inside were 3 men, Victor Rodriguez, Jose Hawk Costa, and Juan Cortez, all associated with Venice 13. Witnesses said a dark SUV cruised up next to them. The passenger's window lowered, and a voice shouted, "Where are you from, SA?" Before anyone could respond, automatic gunfire lit up the night. 15 rounds tore through the car. Victor Rodriguez died instantly. Jose Hawk Costa bled out minutes later. Juan Cortez, barely breathing, survived by luck. A bullet missed his heart by half an inch. Minutes later, police spotted a black GMC Yukon speeding down the 405 freeway. A high-speed chase ensued, headlights flashing, helicopters above, sirens screaming across the night. The SUV finally crashed near the Venice Boulevard exit. 3 suspects were taken into custody. One of them, Juan Lil Silent Cortez, flipped on the others. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he testified in court, giving a chilling first-hand account of the shooting. They told me it wasn't personal, just business. Venice 13 had to be checked. The footage, the testimony, and the shell casings tied the case together. All 3 shooters were convicted of double homicide and attempted murder. By 2009, Venice High School had turned into neutral ground that wasn't so neutral anymore. Fights between Santa Monica 13 and Venice 13 students were becoming daily occurrences. That March, a Venice 13 affiliate known as Lil Stumper got jumped by a group of Santa Monica 13 kids outside the cafeteria. He walked away with a busted lip, but his pride? Gone. A week later, he came back with Wormy, another Venice member looking for payback. They spotted Michael Lopez, a 17-year-old Santa Monica affiliate, near the back of the gym. Words were exchanged. A knife flashed. Lopez dropped to the ground before anyone realized what had happened. The school went into lockdown. Helicopters hovered overhead. Reporters flooded the scene. The stabbing sparked days of tension, graffiti wars, beatings and threats on MySpace and early Facebook pages. Police swarmed the area, and both suspects were arrested within hours. By the end of the 2000s, Venice 13 had lost nearly half of its original members. The rest were locked up, scattered, or fading into the shadows. But the war didn't end. It simply changed hands. Each generation carried the stories of Gilbert, Paco, Carlos, and passed them down like street scripture. One Venice 13 vet told the LA Times, "We used to fight over colors. Now the young ones fight over ghosts." Venice was changing fast. Tech startups, $1 million condos, influencers filming by murals that once marked death zones. But beneath the surfboards and sunshine, the ghosts of the old war still whispered from the walls. The palm trees still stand. The waves still crash. But the war that began in the alleys of Oakwood would soon fade, not through peace, but through exhaustion. By the 2010s, Venice Beach had changed. The smell of gunpowder and spray paint had been replaced by espresso and sea salt. The same corners that once echoed with gunfire now sold organic smoothies. But under the palm trees and painted murals, the ghosts were still there. And for those who survived the war between Venice 13, Culver City 13, and the Venice Shoreline Crips, every sunrise was a reminder. You can't gentrify memory. Oakwood, once called Ghost Town, had become a real estate gold mine. Tech companies moved in, calling it the Silicon Beach. Old homes, once filled with generations of Chicano and Black families, were torn down and replaced with million-dollar condos. One longtime resident, now in his 60s, told the LA Weekly, "They say they cleaned up Venice, but they didn't clean it. They erased it." The OGs who once ruled these streets now walked past strangers walking their dogs, realizing the same alleys they once defended with guns now had valet parking. But not all left. Some stayed, quietly, older, wiser. And every now and then, when the night gets quiet, you'll still see a faint blue V13 tag hidden under fresh paint, a whisper of what used to be. While the streets changed, the war didn't die. It just moved inside, into Ironwood, Pelican Bay, Folsom, and San Quentin. Inmates from Venice 13, Culver City 13, and Shoreline Crips now shared the same yards. But the politics were different here. Inside, the Mexican mafia controlled everything. Old rivalries were set aside for survival. One former Venice 13 member, interviewed under the alias Spider, described it like this: "On the streets, we banged for the block. In prison, we banged for the car." That's the difference between dying for turf and living for the cause. Venice 13 became part of the Sur Sureños umbrella, aligning with other Southern California Hispanic gangs under La M's authority. The same enemies they once fought in the streets now shared their commissary, watched each other's backs, and followed orders that came from higher up. In prison, old grudges became business. And for some, that was the only peace they ever knew. In 2015, Gilbert Rodriguez, who had served nearly 30 years for the shotgun murder of a Culver City member, got a visit from his sister at Ironwood State Prison. He was older now, gray hair, soft eyes, slower speech. She told him about Oakwood, how their old home was now a cafe, how Venice wasn't Venice anymore. Gilbert sat quietly, then said, "We killed each other over sidewalks that don't even exist anymore." He looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred, and whispered, "If I could take it all back, I would. But the streets don't take refunds." Even with gentrification, the war's legacy never disappeared. Ask the right people. They'll tell you it's still there. Every now and then, a graffiti tag appears on a wall in Oakwood, a V13 crossed out by CC13, or a candlelight vigil with faces long forgotten by the media. Venice 13 isn't gone. It just learned to adapt. They stay quiet now, less flashy, more controlled. Their influence still runs through the veins of Southern California's gang network, connected to prison ties and street-level respect. And every few years, when the tension rises, when a new kid wants to make a name for himself, the peace cracks. A single shot at night, and the cycle threatens to start all over again. Not everyone stayed lost to the streets. Some found a way out. A few former members started youth programs, trying to steer the next generation away from what they couldn't escape. One of them, a Venice OG named Benny Lowe, sat in an interview. "We thought being a soldier made us men, but it just made us numbers. Inmate numbers, body counts, case files." He now spends his weekends mentoring kids at a community gym built where a Venice 13 member was once killed. For him, redemption doesn't come easy, but it comes one life at a time. The Venice of the past was more than palm trees and sunshine. It was loyalty, blood, and pain stitched into every wall. 3 gangs, decades of violence. Hundreds of lives changed forever. And yet, at the heart of it all, it wasn't just about hate. It was about belonging, about being seen in a world that refused to look. Some joined for survival. Some joined for revenge. But everyone paid the same price. Respect traded for years behind bars or names carved into candlelit sidewalks. Venice still stands, gentrified, polished, reborn. But if you listen closely, beneath the sounds of skateboards and music, you can still hear the whispers of a war that shaped generations. From palm trees to penitentiaries, this was Venice 13, Culver City 13, and the Shoreline Crips. I'm your host, and this is American Gang War. Because the streets may sleep, but they never forget.